Blog Talk Radio.
Back to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York. Now, if you live inside of the continental United States of America, call us in right now at 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, call us in right now at 1- then 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 1, then 929-477-3997. We are nationally syndicated through the Talk America Radio Network. Now, the Talk America Radio Network, beloved, is indeed the new dominant force in conservative talk radio, and we are also a part of the iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group here in New York City, New York. Now, we have the capabilities in the access to reach at least 300 million people around the world in 150 markets, and we give God all the praise for that. All right, 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, 929-477-3997. Now, if you want to send our guests any questions tonight during the duration of tonight's broadcast, you can do so beginning right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, beloved, that is Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. We are very excited here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York to have back with us what I believe, including a lot of our listeners worldwide, we believe that our special guest is one of the most powerful authors in America, in this Western Hemisphere, and specifically when it comes to Genesis chapter 6, history, the origins of and the history of Genesis chapter 6, and the scholarship when it comes to the Nephilims and the Watchers. And we have back with us, amen, by popular demand, the Honorable Mr. Gary Wayne, author of the blockbuster book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind, only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Gary, it's so great to have you back with us tonight, sir, here again on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Well, so happy to be back and really looking forward to doing the show tonight. And hopefully we'll talk about some things that your audience will have their curiosity raised a little bit more on.
We are very excited. I believe we had Gary back in September of last year, And I'm telling you, when it comes to the Genesis chapter 6 scholarship, I don't believe there is another author or scholar or theologian in America, in the Western Hemisphere, when it comes to the scholarship of the Genesis 6 conspiracy. All right, 929-477-3997. And this is your host and moderator tonight, Bishop Larry Gators. Amen. Gary, I want us to get into a very new topic, at least for our listeners here tonight, not so much for you, and that is exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century. Again, exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century. Give us an overview concerning the history of these Illuminati bloodlines, beginning with the Rothschilds, the Kuhn and Loeb family, the Schiffs, the Warburgs, even up to this very present day. Who controls the world? What reveal to us the major key players, these dynastic kingdoms, not just the 13 Illuminati bloodline families. But let's get into where we left off last year, some of the Illuminati bloodline families that may or may not be well known throughout the world when it comes to those Illuminati bloodline families from Africa and India and China, exposing the Illuminati bloodlines here in the 21st century. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, and it is rather a complex web of bloodlines and organizational relationships and religions and secret societies. And you were mentioning some of the banking arm of these bloodlines. And this is maybe I should probably take a couple steps back so that people kind of have an understanding of the bloodlines and how some of these kind of fit as we talk a little bit more about it. So when we're talking about Kuhn and Loeb and the Warburgs and crossing the ocean and into the Rockefellers and into J.P. Morgan and Carnegie and all the pseudo blue bloods, this is kind of a later sort of extension and more of a visible sort of an extension. But these bloodlines, they go back into history and into royal bloodline histories and all the way back to Genesis 6 with the demigods of the Nephilim and the fallen angels, and of course how they managed to reproduce and show up after the flood to start the kingship dynasties again. And so these are kind of a spin-off of that whole kind of understanding, which is why I think it's so important to understand Genesis 6. And as we look more into the modern side of the history in these Illuminati bloodlines as you describe it, I think a good place to start is with the Templars. And I may go back to some of the founding Templars because these are some of the names that people really need to be kind of aware of, and some of the spin-off families that they did, and then the spin-offs of those spin-off families. But in 1307, you have the Knights Templar being broken up. And this was a very large, huge, important mega organization that invented modern banking and grew wealthy by funding the royal kingships and funding the particular wars. And they were a Gnostic religion that was molded within the Catholic organization. And in 1307, they came suddenly to a halt. And so these organizations needed to be rebuilt after the fall of the Templars and to be a bit decentralized. And so those groups are, just so that people understand who we're talking about are, you have the Freemasons, who a lot of the Templars go to and get protection from the Bruce family that's been excommunicated at that point in time from the Vatican because Robert the Bruce killed his rival in a Catholic church. And of course, he was excommunicated temporarily for that. And also through the Sinclair family that we'll talk more in detail probably a little bit later in the show on. And so you have the Rosicrucians actually rising a little bit before even the Freemasons. And the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and the Illuminati are very, very important. The Rosicrucians are the highest of those organizations that have members of these royal bloodlines, about 50% at the top level. The Illuminati would report to them, and the Freemasons would be sort of the entry level for new initiates to be trained in kind of a school of occultism and to, educate some of the lower level of bloodlines and get some new talent in. But you're never really going to be above a depth level there unless you're going to be with some significant bloodlines as you rise up. And so the Illuminati is formed in around the 1500s too, although I know a lot of people believe that they actually start in about the 1700s. They actually start sooner than that. And then you also have the Royal Society that's going to control religion outside of the Catholic organization and to control science and to lead people away from God. And that's the Royal Society created by the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians. They're also going to create the Jesuits within the organizational structure of the Catholic Church to be molded in like the Templars, to replace them and be at the fronting edge of the exploration and a very, very important role and influencer in the Catholic Church that also has interesting bloodline relationships. And then you also have, then let us not forget the banking arm, which is funded by these organizations and royal families, which is the Bauer family out of Germany, who changed their name to the Rothschilds family name when they set up the London Bank in the early 1800s. And this replaces the banking arm of the Templars. And all of these different functions, whether or not it was with the Freemasons where they focus on politics and the military, or it's the Illuminati who is focusing on world government and the destruction of Christianity, or it's the Jesuits within the Catholic Church who were originally formed to control Catholic education and to take control and eat away of the Catholic Church from within. They all have specific goals that the Templars were all doing. And so if we understand that, then we can understand some of the connections back to some of these more visible families that we see today, like the Rothschilds. And what they do is they partner very early on with families like the Warburgs and the Schiffs, and they cross the ocean with the Rothschilds to take control of the Templar dream, which is America to be the new Atlantis and to be the platform to bring about world government and the universal religion. So you can see all of these organizations are going to be working together, even though they seem a little bit independent. And just as they're all going to take advantage of the colonial aspect of the empires, like with France, and you're going to see the Jesuits, at the fronting edge of all of the French exploration and empire around the world. And just as these organizations are going to work out of the Masonic lodges that expand with not only the French, but more importantly, the English empire around the world. And they're trying to get control of the elite to make allegiances and and partnerships with them, get control of the politics, get control of the education. So that's a pretty good start. Where do you want to go from here, Bishop?
Yes, these bloodlines. It's interesting because I read somewhere, excuse me, Gary, a few days ago, that a lot of these bloodlines. Let's begin with Adam Weishaupt, whether or not we can include him in this bloodline, even reaching up today in the 21st century. And then from Adam Weishaupt, the creator of the Illuminati, 1776, let's go into more in depth with the Rothschilds, their connection again with Kuhn and Loeb, with the Schiff family, and why would these families intermarry into each other as we are exposing this demonic bloodline? Very interesting.
Well, it is one of those things where if you're not a pure blood, and if you are a pure blood, you're going to want to intermarry. If you're not a pure blood, you're trying to enhance your bloodlines for your progeny and descendants coming thereafter. And you're always trying to improve the pedigree of that bloodline. And if you're a royal, you're trying to preserve the purity of that bloodline as it comes down through history. And as everybody knows, for the most part, they all tend to intermarry between their cousins and other royal families, and have done so since the mists of time. And so they're trying to preserve that purity as much as they can without, taking on diseases that comes from too much intermarriage, which is why every once in a while you need to introduce some new blood. And so this intermarriage not only helps with the purity of that bloodline, it also keeps control within a tighter circle and with people that they can trust.
This is interesting.
And
trust.
And they
go
all
right ahead,
profit
Gary. I
from
didn't
it, right?
Go ahead.
Well, no, I just had a thought. And so when you see like the Warburgs or the Schiffs or the J.P. Morgans or the Carnegies or the Rockefellers over in North America, they are all profiting from this partnership. So just as the Bowers, when they start off, they're funding for the secret societies, but they're profiting from it, and they become the biggest bankers in the world. And if you want to control most of the world, you're going to want to control the banking arm. And then what they discovered is if you want to control it even more, you need to get control of the reserve banks around the world, which they've done a very good job on, right? Because it dictates most of government policy.
And this is interesting because as we're exposing this Illuminati bloodline, even up here to the year 2018, I read somewhere recently that because of the interbreeding of these Illuminati bloodlines, there have been a multiplicity, a plethora of blood disorders. Okay, we're talking about going into the House of Windsor, okay, or the Tsar Nicholas family bloodline in Russia. It's interesting. Even the Habsburg. I mean, all of these, and not all, but most of these houses, their descendants, specifically the male heirs, are suffering from different types of blood disorders. I know the only son of Tsar Nicholas II had this blood disorder. He was a hemophiliac. So bring that into my question today, right now. Do you think that these bloodlines, even today, are suffering from those blood disorders because of this inbreeding going back, my goodness, centuries?
Yeah, I think so, and which is why they are so preoccupied by the purity of their bloodline, but bringing in sort of other outside bloodlines to keep those the disease out, and why they're also preoccupied just on blood in general in terms of rituals and things like that, because you get all sorts of disabilities from too much intermarriage, physical and cognitive abilities, and hemophilia, as you talked about, and cystic fibrosis. And you've got like the deformities like the Habsburg jaw, and that's just kind of the start of it. And, often they also have issues with reduced fertility, right? And a lower birth rate. So, and they're subject to a little bit more on certain, kinds of cancer. But they also, with the preservation of the bloodlines that they believe come from the gods, they believe that they have a lot of other advantages. So it's about bringing that balance. And for people who maybe not all that aware of is, and this is a little bit of speculation, but the bloodlines that most of the royals have is Rh negative blood. Which is only about 15% of the population. But what people believe that who have Rh negative blood, is that they believe they have a higher intelligence, right? And better analytical skills, and they believe they're better with intuitive abilities. And they also tend to have a little bit larger heads, which I think goes back to that sort of elongated skull of the antediluvian originals. They believe they have more psychic abilities, which is why they're always more likely to be involved, into the occult, lower body temperature, and on and on and on. So they believe that not only does it preserve their pedigree and their divine right to rule and what they're going to plan to do for the end time, but it also comes with longer life and other things like that. So, risk reward.
And this is interesting. We have with us Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio in Media Group here in New York. So you talk about, let's get into the foundation of this now. We've established the fact concerning the creation, the origins of the Illuminati. Now let's get into the 13 bloodlines. Why the number 13? And then we're going to kind of branch out from there and go into other nations like India and Africa. Very interesting.
Yeah, 13 is a very, very important number in the occult. So 13 is something that they like to work around, whether or not there's an exact number of 13 bloodlines, and it's a bit more of a legend. It is one that is sort of a standard as they sort of break it out. And a lot of people believe there's 13 bloodlines in the U.S., but there's also 13 bloodlines in Europe, and there's also bloodlines around the world. So one should be a little bit careful with that. But these bloodlines, when we talk about the West, that would be intermarrying with the bloodlines in North America, like with the Rockefellers, for example. They tend to go back to this organization and families that is founding the Knights Templar between 1090 and 1099. And, there's some interesting family names within the organization of the Templars that are very much part of the more, let's say, the lesser known purebloods that are in and behind the scenes. And so when we look at the founder of the Knights Templar, that was Godfrey de Bouillon. And Godfrey de Bouillon is, according to their genealogies and what they say within the secret, or inside the secret societies, is that he was a descendant of the last Merovingian king, which was Dagobert. And his partner, Hugh de Payan, is also part of that same bloodlines. Now, these two were from the upper part of the Lorraine district in France. And what's important to know about that is when you see the double cross of Lorraine, which is on an Oreo cookie and which is on so many other different emblems around the world, this is a heraldic cross. This is not a Christian cross. And it is a cross that is denoting a secret that's known within the occult circles. And it is a cross that is holding the secret of what they believe is the genealogy secret held within the secret societies. And this, of course, goes back to de Bouillon's bloodlines, right? And those bloodlines that go back to the Nephilim, and also in their tradition, they also believe it goes back to the progeny of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. But that I want to say that's what they believe. That's not what I believe in terms of that aspect. And whether or not these people actually take their bloodlines back to the fallen angels and can prove it or not, everybody will have to walk away and accept that or not. But what's important to understand, this is what they believe, and they believe they have the records and the proof to back that up. And so this is a very, very important bloodline that is starting the Knights Templar, and it is trying to create an organization and a network that is going to get control of the various thrones around the world and to bring about Antichrist in the end time. Now, what's interesting about de Bouillon is he has a brother who is called Baldwin, and he is crowned in 1118 in a small priory on the Rock of Zion within Jerusalem, and actually call it a priory in Zion, which is where the term Priory of Zion comes from. And Sion, which is the spelling that we have on a transliteration, is just French and Latin for Zion. And so this is where that name comes from. And it's the inner organization of these secret members, and the Templars are just the outside. So these are the purebloods within the organization. And in 1118, on this small priory in Jerusalem on the Rock of Zion, Baldwin is crowned the King of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And this is a very, very important title because it comes down through history, and it comes down through the Lorraine bloodlines, and that's why they have that heraldic cross. And one of the other bloodlines that the Merovingians, where this intersects into it, which Godfrey de Bouillon is a direct descendant of Dagobert, and of course, obviously, his brother Baldwin would also be, is that they also believe that through Mary Magdalene and through some Benjamins who migrate north and into Germany, intermarry, and bringing along with them, as they believe, the bloodline of King Saul of the Benjamites. Now, if people remember in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, at the time of the Exodus after the conquering of the Promised Land, Joshua awards the city of Jerusalem, not yet conquered, to who? The Benjamites.
Right.
And now all of these years later, with these who they believe are the descendants of King Saul, with the bloodlines that is grafted in a scion, S-I-O-N, of many other branches, including the Nephilim, which is the most important as far as my research and understanding goes, although they would perhaps disagree with me a little bit on that, is that Baldwin is crowned King of Jerusalem in 1118, accepting his inheritance, and this is after Jerusalem has been taken by the Christians, right? So they're laying their claim on it because in the end time, they're going to want to claim the King of Jerusalem title in Jerusalem, which they have, and they've passed on down through the millennia at the time of the abomination, when Antichrist, who will come from their bloodlines, which is why it's so important to understand what they believe on the bloodlines, because they're going to want to present the bloodlines of Antichrist in the end time, is going to be crowned King of Jerusalem in the temple at the time of the abomination. The current King of Jerusalem title, as it comes down through King Rene of Lorraine and on to, and I'm going to skip a bunch of centuries and dynasties, but the Habsburgs controlled it for a very long time, and that's why they're called the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty, right? And now it's with King Philip of Spain, and I think he's got a very long name, and Bourbon, as I recall, is the last name, de Bourbon. So he is holding it, and he inherited that from his father, Juan Carlos, the King of Spain. And so I would be watching that King of Jerusalem title to see who it's going to be with as we get closer to the end time. Now, after Baldwin dies, this title passes on to another member of the Knights Templar, founding Knights Templar, and that is the folk of Anjou. In Anjou, there's two factions of Anjou. One is in Italy, and one is in southern Lorraine, and very much related and bloodline related to de Béen and de Bouillon. And so he becomes the second king of Jerusalem. And of course, the Anjou are the family that is going to produce other families and intermarry with a lot of other families as they intermix this purity of blood. He's going to produce, not he, but that bloodline is going to produce the Plantagenet dynasty. And the Plantagenet dynasty in France of Anjou is going to cross through marriage and take over the English dynasty, at the time of King John and King Richard. And I think maybe some of your listeners might be aware of, and maybe some of them aren't, but there's been several studies done on taking the genealogies of the American presidents back. I don't have Trump's as they went back, and I don't know whether Obama did. Most people think Obama would go back more to Egyptian bloodlines. But all the presidents before that link back to the Plantagenet dynasty. So this is a very, very powerful bloodline and matches up, again, both politically and from a ruling class, how these bloodlines have crossed the ocean for America that they've set up to bring about the end time, the world government, and the universal religion as a model to the world, and the power to be able to try and bring that about, although that's not always worked on their timetable or to their satisfaction. So as we talk about these very famous families, I mean, Anjou and Plantagenet are, along with the Payon and de Bouillon, are, four of these very, very powerful families. Now, there was also a family that descends down from Rollo, Rolfo, as he's known, in other accounts out of Sweden, and he's one of these very famous fighting, conquering Viking kings. And so he conquers Normandy in 911, and he makes a treaty and peace with the King of France, and they create an agreement that's called St. Clair, Sierra de St. Clair, as I recall, and pardon my ability to speak French. And
you're
so
good.
And they adopt that name. The Rollo descendants developed the St. Clair name. And in the St. Clair records and genealogies, even though there's only 9 that is mentioned in most accounts of supposedly poor monks, and they were all but 2 were first or second born of the noble class of kings, all but 2 and those were Cistercian monks who were the Gnostics that were rolled in, that were helping within Catholicism to put all of this together, including St. Bernard, who actually petitions and carries with his weight, because he's the second most powerful person in Catholicism at that time, in 1128, gets him a papal bull to officially establish them as a Vatican Catholic Knight Order. So understand that these are very, very famous families, and St. Clair is mentioned in the founders of the Knights Templars because there's only 9. And in some of the Rex Deus accounts, there's 11. But in the St. Clair books and records, they actually say that Henry St. Clair, descendant of Rollo, was part of this. So you have a Swedish northern bloodline that has been intermarrying since 9/11 with the Rex Deus families of their neighboring states, of these bloodlines that were descendants also of the Merovingian bloodline, and intermixing with that. And the Rollo bloodline is also the bloodline that creates William the Conqueror, and who invades and takes the throne back from the Saxons in 1066. In fact, Harold, defeats an invading army from Norway 2 or 3 days before William the Conqueror attacks, and Harold is weakened from this other battle, and William the Conqueror takes over. And crossing over with them and being granted later lands in Scotland are the St. Clairs, who now change their name to Sinclair, S-I-N being Saint, Sinclair. And they are the founders of modern Freemasonry. And of course, this is the bloodline that intermarries with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who produces Justin Trudeau, who is our current Prime Minister. So again, just to tell you how these bloodlines are continually at work and in play. So the St. Clair family, descendants from Norway, and who were partners with King Arthur around the Round Table, and who helped defeated the Romans, and then were eventually defeated by the Saxons, were just taking their throne back, as they thought, that it was rightfully theirs as part of that Round Table alliance. And so we have this interesting sort of web of power that goes with the Swedish bloodline and the St. Clairs, who starts Freemasonry, which is one of those key organizations. And as I mentioned, they have their own agenda, and these are also controlled by the purebloods as it goes up top. I'm going to circle back around to a little bit more on the St. Clairs in a few minutes. But what's interesting about this Swedish bloodline is that there was a king in 1339, again, very shortly after the fall of the Knights Templar in 1307. And he creates, and you're going to love this, Bishop, a very special order of a bloodline of the royal family, and he calls it the Knights of the Seraphim Order. And of course, the Seraphim are the angels in Isaiah 6, who are believed to be the watchers of Genesis 6, who create the Nephilim. And within their imagery and iconology, they have the double cross of Lorraine, again signifying that what their bloodlines are. So, and again, this whole iconology and symbolism is very, very important to the occult. But I'm just, again, showing the extension of that. And this is a sister organization that has members and intermarries with another interesting group called the Knights of the Golden Fleece. And Golden Fleece is just another allegory for antediluvian knowledge or hidden knowledge. And people might be aware of it as the hidden bolts of Enoch or the pearls of wisdom that is hung on Azazel, who's hung in the Roslyn Church built by the St. Clairs. No coincidence there. Archives of the Masons, or the Emerald Tablets, or the Tables of Destiny, or the Rainbow Treasure. Notice the rainbow allegory. The pot of gold is not really gold. It's actually knowledge. It's also known as the Shatia, and on and on and on with these allegories of this knowledge that they also secret within. So they secret within these organizations and bloodlines, their secret bloodline and the ancient knowledge. And the St. Clairs are so powerful that they also intermarry with other families of Rex Deus, and they produce sort of extended families that would be considered more of the more modern hidden bloodline. So the Bouillon is still part of the modern bloodline. The Payan is, Anjou, Plantagenet is, and St. Clair is. But they also intermarry, for example, with the Geezer family. Oh, and just as Hugh de Payan also marries into the St. Clair family. And Hugh de Payan is also the son-in-law of Saint Bernard, who is from the Montbard family, Entre Montbard, who is also one of the founders of the Knights Templar. So again, you can see how closely some of these bloodlines work. Now, the Priory of Sion splits away from the Templars in 1188. And what's interesting about that is they have a cult ceremony, because the elm tree is very, very important, just as you had this huge elm tree in Paris that the Templars did a lot of their banking and rulings from under, just this massive tree. So they have the cutting of an elm ceremony in Geezer, where the Priory of Sion leaves the Knight Templar organization because they feel they've lost their way. And this is also the time when Jerusalem is lost. And they think that the Templars have become too focused on banking and making money than what they were designed to do. They've lost their way. So another member of the family of that you need to keep in mind for the modern time is where this ceremony was done, which was just very close to Normandy, and it was in Geezer Castle. And so the Geezer family, Gisor, is very much a familiar one, just as the St. Clairs will intermarry with them and create a new family called St. Clair de Geezer, right? So you also have St. Clair de Neg, which is another one of the family names. And also you have an intermarriage and a crossover into the Habsburg family of this bloodline coming from the German and the Norse side again, just as the Hanovers would be connected in with the German line, just as the Swedish was, and this has become sort of intermarried over time. And you have connecting into that is the Habsburg family, the Habsburg Lorraine as they were called. So again, going back to Lorraine and the Anjou, de Payon, de Bouillon, all being sort of nicely interconnected. Again, according to inside researchers, you would have Joinville, Habsburg, and Brienne, and the Bruce family. And Bruce family were called the De Bruce family, and they were also came over from Normandy with Henry St. Clair at the time of William the Conqueror, and he's also Norse in his background. So you have the Bruce family that is now basically Rexaeus and part of the Rollo clan, working with the St. Clairs to create Freemasonry and giving the Templars protection in escaping from France in 1307. And of course, from there you have all the other organizations being created that I talked about. Now, when we go back now to the founding of the Templars, I did mention Andre Montbard, and again, he's from the Burgundy region, and Saint Bernard's uncle was Andre de Montbard. So Saint Bernard, who's in the Catholic family, he's of royal blood as well, and he also, worked for the Saint Bernard also did work for the Champagne family, and was in and out of service out of that, and of course, of the bloodlines that would be intermixed as it comes down and may still be there that were just not being recognized, they would be the Champagne family. And of course, what they did was they donated and funded St. Bernard for his abbey and all of his things he wanted to do at the abbey of, I'm trying to think of the name, in Citeaux. It's a Cistercian abbey. And so again, you see this very interesting sort of interworking of who these people are in the Knights Templar. They're not poor monks or peasants that form this Knight Order. These are royal bloodlines.
Well, this is again, Brother Gary, you're blowing my mind. I'm learning something, and we're getting to all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners. Excuse me. You're calling in right now. We may or may not get to your questions. We'll definitely get to the email questions, but just hold tight. Continue to call in. Continue to send in your questions. Maybe in the second half of the broadcast, we will get to some of your questions. Exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 20th century here with world-renowned author Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, how secret societies and the descendants of giants plans to enslave humankind, only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. You may mention, and you hit a nerve with me concerning these presidents. I read somewhere today that the only president, and again, what I'm about to say to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, I'm not saying I'm right, and neither am I saying that I'm wrong. But according to this, what we call this Atlantean conspiracy, all 44 presidents, the first 44 presidents of the United States of America, have some blood lineage, okay, going back to, was it King John of England? Okay, going back to
who was forced to sign the Magna Carta. Same king.
Oh, Wow. And to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, Gary, can you explain, before we get further into the bloodlines, especially through these U.S. presidents, and I want to touch on the Canadian Prime Minister as well, what is the Magna Carta? Explain that to us.
Well, that was, the king was all powerful at that time. So, and there wasn't really a parliament. There was just a noble class. Now, the noble class who forced King John to the table, and he surrenders his power. So it limits the power of kingship at that time. So it's moving away from tyrant to more of a democracy move, and that's kind of the first major document that limits that power through the nobles. Now understand that these nobles were all royal bloods as well. The reason why they did this was they had enough of the tyranny of King John, who is the brother of King Richard, both who liked to don the Red Cross of the Templars. So understand this is, again, an in-house squabble, just as World War I was an in-house squabble of cousins, because whether it's the czars of Russia or the Kaisers of Germany, or the kings and the emperors of the Habsburgs in Austria, or the kings of the Windsors, which is another one of these family bloodlines, goes back to the Hanoverian German line that I talked about, that intersects with Rollo and then intermarries. They're all cousins, and this is an in-house squabble.
Excuse me, man. And you know what? I did not know. Man of God, I'm still learning. I did not know that most of the European, excuse my throat because I've been battling the cold for the past month and a half, but all of these, not all, but most of these European dynastic houses are interrelated. I didn't know that Tsar Nicholas II was related to King George V of the House of Windsor, and he was related to Kaiser Wilhelm II in Germany. This is amazing.
Yeah. They would have sisters or brothers, depending on their kings or queens, that were on the throne of some of these other kingdoms. And in worst case, they would be a cousin thereof, right? So, yeah, I mean, and they did that to keep the bloodlines pure, but to try and not to have too much intermarriage, right? So a little bit outside for a while, bring it back in. And typically, I mean, this goes right back to the pharaohs and the kings of Mesopotamia, and whether or not it was Mitanni or the Amalekites or the Hittites. And I do know the Amalekites were lost to history, but they were a very powerful royal bloodline and did intermarry with the other kingships. Or the pharaohs of Egypt, they would intermarry to do the same thing. And if they wanted to start a new dynasty, they would do that through the matriarchal bloodline. And so they would pick a very ennobled, pure blood female to marry, a prince to start a new dynasty in another location. So this goes right back to the Nephilim concept of maintaining their bloodlines, because they feel they're legitimately from their point of view, a different race and a superior race. And that humans are mundane. So, and they really don't want to use human blood and bloodlines, but over the millennia they've had to because of the diseases.
And this is interesting. Getting to that Rh negative, I believe you said when you were on the TV portion of the broadcast last year, that the percentage of the Bazik people in Spain that has this Rh negative blood type goes up to around 36%. Am I correct in saying that?
Some estimates are 50. Most of the estimates,
wow,
and particularly within the Basiki or the Basque, depending on how you want to pronounce that, culture, say more like 70 to 80%. And what's interesting about that group is they believe they were from Atlantis, and they call themselves Homo Atlantis is their genus, I guess, as they would call themselves, and that they actually started the civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Scythia, and also in Spain where they settled. after the flood. And what's also interesting about these bloodlines of the Basques is that they feel that their bloodline was more superior than that of the Middle East ones that migrated to Europe. And so when you have these Rexteas bloodlines and these European kingships that I'm talking about, they believe their bloodline was more pure than theirs. And so they had a very elitist sort of position. And because of that, the other bloodlines ganged up on them, and that's why you have the Basque or Baziki diaspora, where they were chased basically out in great numbers and dispersed around the world. And when you understand now with these bloodlines and understanding, I said something that might have been a little bit controversial about the Jesuits earlier on in their role, and that they're all part of this. You need to understand that, you know, two of the main founders of the Jesuit order were Basques, and that would be that would be Francis Xavier and Ignatius of Loyola. They were both Basques.
Wow.
So
keep going.
So as I was saying earlier on in the show, if you want to understand things, you need to understand not only the organizations and what they are at the core and how they work together, but also the bloodlines and what their agendas are, if you want to really understand what's going on.
This is so interesting, and I want to further in the broadcast get into some of these lesser-known Illuminati bloodlines in Africa, India, when it comes to the Khan family, in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, including the Dragon Court, the House of Li, the dynastic kingdom of Li there in China. 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that's 929-477-3997. Exposing the Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century. Here with, I believe, the world's foremost authority when it comes to the Genesis chapter 6 theology. We've had a lot of pastors and theologians down through the years, man of God, to explain about the 6th chapter of Genesis, but never, and to everyone, to all of our listeners right now, if you get an opportunity, please buy this book right now. Get out your credit card, your American Express, MasterCard, Visa. Go on Genesis6Conspiracy.com. Again, Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and buy this book right now. You should be buying it right now. Every pastor, whether you're a pastor or a lay minister or just a Christian, a person, a lay member in the local church, the body of Christ, if you want a greater knowledge of Genesis chapter 6, you don't need to buy any other book. The only book you need to buy is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Go to Genesis6Conspiracy.com, Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and I believe they can also order that through Amazon Canada and Amazon here in the U.S. as well. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely, and Amazon.uk actually stocks the book as well. It is available on Kindle, so it's available on Kindle format around the world, and it's also available if you can't get it wherever you might be listening around the world. And the bonus is you get a signed copy is you can buy it from my website, the Genesis6Conspiracy.com with the number 6. And if you live in the Middle East somewhere, if you live in Asia or in Sweden, if you go to the buy now, buy signed copy, go to the U.S. page, I'll pick up the additional freight to ship it to you.
Thank you so much, man of God. 929-477-3997. Excuse me. Getting back to these the bloodlines of the presidents. Now, I had a pastor, theologian friend of mine here in New York City state that according to his research, and he may be wrong, and I may be wrong what I'm about to say, but the only president in U.S. history who does not have a royal lineage or connection to any European dynastic house is Donald Trump. Now, he may be royal. I don't know, but the previous 44 presidents, from George Washington to at least Barack Obama, are all interrelated. Is this the pedigree? Is this the requirement that in order to be a president, not just here in the U.S., Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, you may mention in Canada, if you're not in the royal bloodline, it seems like you may or may not be president of any country or prime minister of any country. What's your take on that, Garrett?
Yeah, or not last very long, because they're always trying to take them out, right? And so if they don't go along with the agenda, or they're not the ones that they wanted to win, and typically they control it all, so that it doesn't matter whether or not, let's say you go back to the classic would have been Bush and Gore, right, after Clinton, and they're both of the bloodlines, and they're both skull and bones, and they're both Illuminati, and they're both CFR, and they're just so totally controlled by the secret societies and the bloodlines that they usually give you two options, and to them they don't really care, right? And they allow them a certain amount of flexibility within their policy, but they're all pushing in the direction of how do we bring about world government, and how do we destroy Christianity, how do we lead people away from God, and how do we bring about the universal religion so we can bring about Antichrist. That's all they're working on. And you see that forming with their policies, even through things like trade policies.
Right.
And the last time we had global free trade was under the Roman Empire, which is they're really trying to set up, right? Which is Daniel and Revelations basically saying that it's going to be an extension out of the Roman Empire, and free trade is going to permit them to set up these trading blocks, right? And or spheres of influence, or multiple countries or regions, whatever you want to call it, just as you had 10 antediluvian countries or empires working together known as the Atlantean Empire in what they called the Golden Age, that was ruled over by the offspring of Poseidon, a fallen angel god, depending on your perspective on that. Mine is fallen angel, and Clymene, a human female, who had 5 sets of twins, for 10 to rule over this burgeoning world empire during this golden age, as they like to talk about it and view it back from a revisionist point of history perspective. So they want to create these 10 empires in the end time. And so in the 1960s, late 1960s, the Rosicrucians are going to form an organization called the Club of Rome.
Yes.
Coincidence with the name there, right? And their goal is to bring about world government, but with these 10 empires, these 10 regions, these 10 groups of nations, these 10 trading blocks. So they've already established who they want to run them and how they're going to look. And it's all through the bloodlines around the world. And interesting, and I saw it twice when I was growing up on CBC. I'm from Canada, CBC National News. They had Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father, who was also Prime Minister, going into meetings twice to the Club of Rome in the late 60s. And of course, again, I already noted they go back to the Sinclair bloodline with intermarriage of Margaret Trudeau. And the Trudeau family is one of the first families coming out of France in the 1600s. So again, all of these things just always sort of tend to tie together.
That is so interesting. We have with us, again, one of my favorite historians, one of my favorite people that I love to interview, and that is Mr. Gary Wayne, author of the blockbuster book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Planned to Enslave Humankind. only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Get out your credit card right now. Go to Genesis6Conspiracy.com, Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and buy this book right now. And again, I want to kind of branch off. I think we left off several months ago when you talked about the bloodlines. You made mention concerning the society of the assassins in the Arab world, and we kind of lightly touched on the Khan family there in India. From your research from our last conversation, have you found any more bloodlines, Illuminati bloodlines, not just in India but Africa, and then we're going to touch on the Lee family as well.
Yeah, I have done a little more work in that area. I still find Africa to be very, very difficult. There's just not much for records, and that one's going to be one of the latter one to, to identify. I think there's just not that sort of written record. So you're dealing with so many countries and so many different tribes and so many bloodline lineages. But one would expect you would find some consolidation there as well. And you're absolutely correct about the assassins who were working with the Templars. And this is the organization that the Templars bring across with these nobles who formed the original Templars back to Europe. And of course, the Aga Khan is the leader of Sufism. And this is the bloodline that also seems to have some Mongolian and Persian intermarriage with, and that the Khans of Mongolia believe that their bloodlines actually go back to King Og of the Bible in some of their legends, which is, I haven't been able to nail down that as fact, but that's sort of what they say. So you have this Persian, Mongolian, Arab bloodline, which is kind of important to remember, that is running the mystical part of Islam. So it is a polytheist form of Islam, just as Gnosticism is in the West, and Gnostic Christians, as they like to call themselves, where they, don't believe Jesus is the Son of God, or the Messiah, or the Word of God, and the Redeemer and the Savior, and on and on and on and on. They believe he's just a mortal prophet, which is going to be part of the deception for the last time. They're going to de-deify Jesus, and I think that's part of what they're going to do with the introduction of the genealogies of the bloodlines that they have allegedly of the offspring of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, that they say came from their third son, Josephus, that married into the Camelot dynasties that crossed over with Amenemhat and Urigen, the Merovingian dynasty, just to connect some dots from earlier in the show. And so this Khan family is one of the more powerful and richest families of the world, controlling a very, very powerful set of religious leaders and business people around the world. And they maintain contact with the people of the bloodlines and the secret societies. In fact, Justin Trudeau in Canada got into quite although he's been let off the hook, even though he was guilty on about 7 conflict of interest legislations, he went down at the expense of the Aga Khan to spend vacation with them a couple of years ago at Christmas, all expenses paid, and they did some business dealings. And the Aga Khan family has been personal friends with Justin since he was a kid, because he was personal friends with Pierre Trudeau, and one wonders how far back that goes. And then if you understand the Sinclair connection, and you understand that the assassins were part of the forming organizational structure and partnered with the Templars in the beginning when they still had control of Jerusalem, it's just way too much of a coincidence to ignore. But I have done a little more research on the subcontinent of India, and I found some interesting things. Again, it's a long history. There's a lot of different dynasties, but there is a few interesting sort of connections and commonalities that sort of come down through, the various dynasties. And it's one of the older civilizations in the world as well. So this goes back into some prehistory, and you were asking me, what connection of there might be to, the Singh dynasty, the Singh family, the Singh title, right?
Yes, sir.
And so I'm going to connect a few dots on that. And
yes,
so for people who don't know, the Singh dynasty, as it's understood in today's term, and Singh is one of the more common names out of India. The Singh dynasty was, came about in the modern sense in about the 1800s, about 1801. But it has more ancient tentacles that reach back. And so Ranjit Singh was, a descendant of, of a bloodline sort of thing. Again, that is typical of what happens around the world, and it sort of connects back through history into the Mughal Empire. And in this Mughal Empire also intermarried with the Persian kings as well. And when we're talking about the Persian kings, we're obviously talking about Cyrus and that bloodline, and obviously there's probably a Nebuchadnezzar bloodline in there as well. So we have some interesting relationships that start to be formed as we look at all of that. But as you dig deeper below that, you understand that you learn that Singh is more than a name. It's also can be, a middle name. It can be a surname, but it's also a title. And so as a title, it's the male title. So we're talking about a patriarchal understanding, just as we were talking about a patriarchal bloodline with the cross of Lorraine, and as opposed to the matriarchal bloodlines of, of the owls and of the fairies. But what it means is it's Sanskrit for lion. And where this starts to get interesting, this is part of the bloodline ruler warrior caste that comes down in three different ruler warrior caste separations, but from the Singhs coming out of the formation of the empire in the 1800s, these are the Sikh Rajput kings, right? That go back to the warrior class of the Kshatriyas and their royal king warrior class. There's also another one I'll touch on before I walk away from here in terms of the Rajputs. But the Rajputs have a patrilineal connection going back in time to the Aryans, the first settlers of northern India. And of course, Aryans are believed in the occult to be survivors of the flood and giants, and possibly even part, the Atlanteans. Certainly from a Tuatha De Danann and a Nazi perspective, they like to adopt the Aryans as sort of the founding titans that escaped from Tartarus after the flood. But that's going down a rabbit hole of mythology. But back to India on that, this has that connection also back to the Scythians, and who also have, are connected with the Aryans, as I just mentioned. And so when we take this back in its bloodline, you have a god by the name of Agni, Agni, and he starts this, and he's a solar deity, as opposed to Vishnu, which would be a more of a, I guess, a creator deity. There's several different ones, and the Brahma would also be another one that also designs a caste as well. And so this is the Rajput king clan that goes back, connects them back to the god Agni. So you have a similar story with Aryans and giants, and there's giants all throughout in Vedic and Indian history. And if people haven't heard of some of those gods, or those Nephilim names and giants that are listed, they're called the Danuwa, the Daitya, the Asuras, and several other names, but those are 3 or 4 that, just to give some substance, that it's a similar story. And so what this Sing title is it comes down from this Agni deity, and it's a Sanskrit word for lion, right? Which is a typical iconology for royalty, as we know in the West, particularly with the coat of arms and things like that, just as dragons are. And so you have this lion Nephilim bloodline of a warrior class, right? And what's interesting about that is in the Bible, in First Chronicles and in Second Chronicles or Second Samuel, we get the lion men of Moab, right? And these are seemingly a Nephilim kind of character, and they're described as looking like lions. Yes. And one wonders whether or not this has a connection to these lion-type Nephilim that come down from the god Agni. And, of course, the word that, lion that goes back is 738 and 739, one being Eri and the other one being Ariel, with El being an angel or a god. And Ariel literally means lion of God, right? And so one wonders whether or not they're talking about another bloodline that's slightly different than the typical serpentine Nephilim that we think about that came from the Watchers in Genesis 6. And all throughout mythology and prehistory, you get accounts of gods with lions' heads, right? And you also get lion people, right? So you have, the lion men of Babylonia. And, and it had the head of a lion and a body of a man and the feet of a bird. You've got King Hambada, who is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, again, Mesopotamian, and he had, the face and the paws of a lion and bull horns and vulture claws, but you get the lion sort of aspect, and it had some other interesting aspects. And then you have lion people, depicted on Egyptian reliefs. And saying that it's coming from a god by the name of Mahe or Mesis, which is the Egyptian, lion god of war. And so you have this long sort of history. I won't give everything. Chimera gets connected back as well. And one wonders whether or not there is this other strain of Nephilim that are out there. Now, the other warrior ruling class, which will intermarry with these Sikhs or these Kshatriyas, I think as it's pronounced, are known as Nagas, who form the other class, right? Now, the Nagas were, and Naga comes from the word not snake, but comes from the word in Sanskrit for cobra, so a very descriptive look. And again, cobra is part of a lot of other royalty, just as all serpentine imagery is part of kings and gods around the world. And, if you're wanting to have a god-like dragon that would parent these, you would have a seraphim viper-faced angel, and you put wings on them, and you've got, an angelic dragon, an angelic god dragon, just as they might be called a plumed or feathered serpent in Central and South America, and known as other types of dragons in China and in Southeast Asia and in Japan. But where I'm going on this is that these Naga warrior class were born from Naga gods, and they also look like a serpent, just as the seraphim did, and they intermarried. So you have two branches of royal bloodlines that may be all intermingled now, and Sikh is certainly one of the more common one, but I would also suggest that there probably are other royal bloodlines that might come to surface in the end time, who's going to look after the Indian-dominated world empire.
Man, this is deep. Man, this is, oh, man. You know what? We might have to keep you here all night, Gary. and I do apologize to Gary and to everyone right now feeling under the weather. I have been for the last month, so forgive me, Gary, for coughing, and to all of our global spiritual revolution partners, exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century here with one of my favorite guests here, who is no longer a guest. He is a part of the global spiritual revolution family as we're discussing these Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century. And you talked about India, those Indian bloodlines with the Singh dynasty. I think we touched on the Khan dynasty when the last time you were on the broadcast. I've been getting some emails the last few days concerning the history of what they call the caste system in India. Can you explain a little further what this caste system in India is? It seems like they're trying to divide royal blood from unroyal blood as far as this Illuminati system in India. Very interesting. All right, Gary, you still with us on the line? All right.
I am, and there are. I had my mic off. There are 4. So I was talking, but you weren't hearing.
Maybe you went to heaven, Lord. No, go ahead.
So there are 4 Varna castes, as I understand it, in India, and it does exactly that. It's designed to separate the royal bloodlines from the mundane bloodlines, or the humans. And so the 2 upper class are the warrior class that I've described, and there's actually 3 classes of that with 2 dominant ones. And then there's a priest class, which is the Brahmin priest class, which again is a bloodline descendant of families, and also goes back to the Aryans who bring the Brahmin religion that goes back to Zoroastrianism, which is also prevalent in Persia. And that's why you have this mixture of Persian Khan in India in terms of the bloodlines and important families, right? And so the Brahmins are the priest class. And this is important to understand. I'll touch on the other 2 classes in a minute. When you look at India feeding the Chinese traditions and religions, and Southeast Asia, and eventually the Japanese, because you get, let's say, in the Japanese tradition, you have the Tengu. And the Tengu are these bird-like gods who produce 2 classes, a priest class and a warrior class, just as the Indians do. And this is all part of the same extended religion, because it's that religion that spreads through China and in through Southeast Asia and into into Japan. So it's a constant that comes from the same root. You also have below those 2 classes, the 2 royal bloodline classes that go back to the gods. You have the farming and what they call the merchant class, the Vaishya, as I recall. And so this is kind of like a lower level middle class. And then below that you have the Shudra, which is the working class. But all of these below those 2 levels are either very, very low bloodlines as you get into the merchant class, or strictly mundane human bloodlines.
This is deep, and you know excuse me. I'm sorry, Gary. The present day Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, capital M-O-D-I, and it's very interesting about his bloodline. He was born to a family called the Gujarata, if I can pronounce that, Gujrata, capital Gujarati, which the Gujarata family is also interconnected back into the Indian Illuminati bloodline of the Singh dynasty, including the Khan dynasty on his father's side. And I find it interesting because I had an Indian bishop right after we had you back in, I believe, September. I remember the following day sending an Indian bishop in Bombay a question concerning all of the prime ministers in India. Were they a part of the Singh bloodline and a Khan bloodline? He said 97.3% of all the prime ministers in the history of the Indian government there in India since they gained independence from the British Empire are interconnected to this Illuminati bloodline. Man, I find that interesting. If I can touch on too, Gary, and forgive me for running my mouth, but again, every time you're on here, I feel like keeping you all night long, and so you could just teach us, because we may not let you go tonight, but we have with us exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century with our very special guest, who is no longer a guest. He is a part of the Global Revolution family, Mr. Gary Wayne, here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. I've done just a little research when it comes to some of these African bloodlines. And like you said, it's not too much, but I found the richest man outside of the Rothschilds and outside of the Oppenheimer family, those in South Africa, dealing with the gold and diamond mines in South Africa, is a Nigerian by the name of Aliko Dangote. Okay, his last name is spelled capital Dangote. His bloodline also goes back, and it's very interesting, to a family called the Peregrines, capital Peregoni, the Peregrines. I'm sorry, capital Peregons. And I've never even heard of this. But anyway, the Peregrines were a blood royalty out of Eastern Europe. And this is going back thousands of years. But like you said, it's hard. It's very difficult trying to find some Illuminati connection in Africa outside of the Rothschilds, outside of the Oppenheimers in South Africa. Very interesting.
Yeah, and there is a connection, though, out of Ethiopia, though. And Haile Selassie is probably famous in recent history. And so what he does is he takes his bloodlines back to Queen Sheba and Solomon. That apparently that they produced a bloodline that he believes that he descends down from. Now, I don't know how he intermarries with other European families, but they also have, as part of their iconography, is the double cross of Lorraine.
Oh.
So
I
again,
forgot about him. Yeah.
So there is some intermarriage going on there, and one presumes that there's intermarriage that would have been going on ongoing as they conquered and colonized the African continent, because typically when this conquering went on is they may have killed the local king or leader of that time, but not the rest of the family, right? And so we have an analogy out of Central and South America with the Spanish, that when they settled and conquered, the Incas and the Aztecs and on with that whole Spanish conquest is again, typically, they would have killed Montezuma, right? But the Dukes of Montezuma were reinstated with nobility thereafter, and just as this happened everywhere they went. And you'll find this interesting is that once they were given the status back, members of the nobility out of Spain and of the Biziki or the Basques also intermarried with them. And the Hidalgo clan would be a very, very important name in terms of understanding a cross-ocean connection back. And there are other families as well, throughout Brazil, throughout South America, throughout the Maya, throughout the Mexicans. There's different family names, and they all kept their nobility and kept their genealogies. Another family might be the Roca, which take their bloodlines back to the sun god of partner of the creator god Viracocha. So again, this would not be unusual that this would go on. Maybe not quite as at a high level of bloodline in the beginning, but certainly perhaps over time. But they would do some crossbreeding, and it would also be good if they felt that they had royal bloodlines that went back to the fallen angels and back to the giants, that they could also bring that bloodline back and intermix with their other bloodlines to keep those bloodlines a little bit more pure and free of disease. So it makes sense to do that around the world.
That is so interesting. And I cannot keep up with your mind, Gary. It's just your mind, excuse me, it's like a machine. We have with us Gary Wayne tonight. We got to get you here to New York City one day. Exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century. And to Brother Gary, and to all of our listeners, please forgive me for coughing. I am battling the flu, but we're going forth here tonight in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. I just also found out in preparing for you today, there is a billionaire African woman by the name of Isabel dos Santos, capital Santos. She is the oldest daughter of Angola's longtime former president, Jose dos Santos. Okay, Jose Eduardo dos Santos, who stepped down in 2017. But anyway, her bloodline, her father's bloodline, on her father's side, goes back to Haile Selassie. Even though she's supposed to be, quote unquote, an Angolian citizen, but her bloodline is actually Ethiopian. I find that to be interesting. And this, again, not to beat a dead horse, the Nigerian billionaire that I made mention a few minutes ago, who is supposed to be the richest man in Africa, which I don't believe he is actually probably one of the Rothschilds or the Oppenheimers. Aliki Dangote, he's a Nigerian. He made his billions in cement, sugar, and flour, and most of his contracts in the construction business is building Rothschild and Oppenheimer buildings. So he's not the richest man, but Dangote. His bloodline is, someone just sent me an email, and his name is Perry. He is from here in Albany, New York. He said that bloodline of Dangote goes back to the Enochians. And he sent me some information, and I will send that to you, Gary, for verification. All right. Wait, this is deep.
That was Enochians?
Yeah.
How do they spell that? Is that like Anunnaki or Anak or Enochians?
Yes.
Anunnaki,
I keep saying Enochians. Anunnaki, yes. And this, just the word Dangante, which is actually Nigerian, is actually a Muslim Nigerian name, is some way, somehow connected to the Anunnaki bloodline. I don't know. He sent me a link. I'll send that to you after the broadcast. So this is interesting, but it's hard. It's very difficult finding these bloodlines in Africa.
Yeah, and Anunnaki, of course, were again gods like the fallen angels. Some had a bird-like look, and some had, and most of them were serpent-like look, just as that shows up in Chinese and Japanese religions. But they were also their earthborn offspring were also called Anunnaki, and these were the giants. These are the ring lords. These are right. So you've got the same bloodline going on. It's called something different. They're called different names all around the world. I mean, there's a Balba in Central America, right? So, and I would be also looking my gut feeling is that you would find some Egyptian pharaonic bloodlines, going down through the Nubians that would probably gone into the Ethiopians, and one would presume would have spread down through Africa. Would be another angle to try and figure out how to get at, because that would make some sense. And the Nether gods out of Egypt, which were the creation gods, and there's a few different names of the gods, but I'll use the Nether gods. Were called, their name translates back as ones who watch, as in watcher, as in seraphim angels.
Wow.
Just as the Urshu gods, which is another name of these gods, and there's also Ogdoad gods, and they were very much serpent-like looking individuals, the Ogdoads. But the Urshu, as they're also called, goes back to watchers. And so you have that connection again, that you expect that that bloodline is going to show up. And we were talking about the assassins earlier, and I should have got this in a little bit earlier. But ASAS, which assassin comes from, means guardian of knowledge. So, and then if you get into Greek words, as in dragon, as I mentioned that earlier, that comes from drakon or drakonta, and guess what that means? To watch. So you have, so this this is a common understanding around the world in prehistory about these gods who were watchers and governors and who were serpentine. And it would seem of other looks as well. Yeah.
And getting to the Indian Parliament, someone just sent me an email and reminded me concerning the Indian Parliament. I think I touched on this last time when you were on the air, that most of the politicians in the Parliament of India, which is composed of two sections or departments, the Council of States in the House of the People, the Council of States, the Rajya Sabha, and the House of the People, the Lok Sabha. And I want to do some word searches on that tonight after the broadcast to see if these two Indian words, these East Indian words, of Rajya Sabha, the Council of States, and the Lok Sabha, the House of the People, are could be interconnected into Illuminati bloodlines, because again, and back to that caste system, as we're exposing these Illuminati bloodlines, you cannot get into any political position in India unless you are a part of that royal upper class bloodline. Well, this is interesting.
Well, I believe Raja is another word for king in India.
Oh. Wow. Man, this is wow. I'm telling you, we have Gary Wayne. Gary, we're going to have to keep you here all night because this is you're teaching me some things I did not know. You hit another nerve with me earlier in the broadcast, and forgive me for coughing, Brother Gary, and to all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners. That line in there, maybe a few weeks ago, we had a group of pastors, apostles on the air. We were talking about 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 34 downward to verse 37. I won't read all those verses, but in verse 34, David says, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock. And you notice in verse 35, 1 Samuel 17:35, and I went out after him. Now, David didn't say I went out after them, plurality, lion and bear, but him, singular. Sounds like a hybrid demon, or a hybrid principality that he was fighting against, and smote him, not them, lion and bear, and delivered it out of not their mouth, his mouth. So it seems like, and we write down the word quickly, lion and bear, and circle every other letter, beginning with L for lion, and then the remaining letters, you get the words loba, L-O-B-A, then the word inner, I-N-E-R. Now, the term loba inner, or inner lobe, it means inner lobe. And I'm thinking, okay, Lord, what are you saying? What David was fighting against was not a natural bear and a natural lion. Just maybe that David was fighting against this hybrid beast that its blood is traced back to Genesis chapter 6. Maybe this hybrid principality that David was fighting against, and mind you, the term David or David, when interpreted in Hasidic Hebrew, it comes from the Hasidic Hebrew word dasam, and that's very interesting, capital D-O-S-S-A-M, which means silence, which means isolation, which means execution. So dasam, spelled right to left, rabbinically reveals the word Mossad. That's another teaching for another day. But I find it interesting there. You may mention the head of a lion and the body of a bear. It seems like that David was not fighting against a natural entity of what we call a lion and the bear. What's your take on that, Gary?
Yeah, I think David was fighting all sorts of corrupted forms of creation, and so we talked about the lion men. I think there was more than just the lion men. I mean, he fought also against the Nephilim, right? I mean, Goliath is a descendant of Rapha, right? And as you take that back, giant goes back to Rapha. And he's described as one of those beings from Rapha. And the Rephaim are descendants of the Nephilim. Just as you take that back from Genesis, Numbers 13, the Anak are descendants of Nephilim. And the Anak, as you learn in Deuteronomy, are Rephaim. So if the Anak come from Nephilim, so does the Rephaim.
Man, and again, as we're exposing this Illuminati bloodline, we got to have you back, Gary, because it's there is not enough time. But let's go forward anyway. There is this word that's really been, and I might be mispronouncing it, and I believe the Apostle Paul said this in one of his epistles in the New Testament, this word Scythian, I might be mispronouncing it, capital S-C-Y-T-H-I-A-N, when it comes to these Illuminati bloodlines. And I believe Paul made mention of this either 1st or 2nd Corinthians. What is your studies when it comes to these Scythians in regards to these? Yes, sir.
Are you referring to Scythian or Scythian without the N?
Scythian.
Okay, yes, those are the Galatians that Paul talks about. And Galatians, Scythians, Gauls are Celts. And these are the people that intermarry. Actually, the descendants of Japheth are going to intermarry with the people of Scythia and northwest Turkey. This is where that sort of occult and biblical history kind of come together a little bit, because Scythians are believed to be the Titans that escaped out of Tartarus. And so typical names of these giants in the antediluvian epoch as they come out of Greek mythology would be Iapetus or Japetus, which people say is just the Greek name for Japheth. I don't think so. I think that they're two distinct different names, and maybe Japheth actually took the name of a giant, because Gog and Magog are also Greek giants, just as they show up in English history, as does Albion and Brutus and several other ones. And these are all part of the same group that the descendants of Japheth marry into. And I think they actually take those names of those giants, just as I think Amalek, who is the son of Eliphaz of Esau, and his Horim wife Timnah, and Horim are another form of Rephaim or Nephilim, who are the dukes and the descendants of Seir, right? Seir is a Horim, as we're told in Genesis. And so I think Amalek takes the name because we get the Amalekites showing up before Amalek is even born. So if you go back to Genesis 14 with the war of 4 kings against 5, in the time of Abraham, the Amalekites and the Horim are mentioned, but the Amalekite nation that's supposed to form from this marriage under the leadership of Amalek happens later. So something's out of whack there, and I don't think the Bible is being incorrect or inaccurate. I just think that it's the pattern of descendants of Noah after the flood accepting the names of the giants. So these Scythians are also known as the Tuatha Danann. And the Tuatha Danann, they migrate to not only to Scotland as the Picts, and not only to Ireland as Tuatha Danann and as the red-haired, hazel-eyed Tuatha Danann, but they also migrate north into Russia and into Germany and into Sweden, as we mentioned earlier, as the blonde hair.
Oh. Well, you're teaching, Gary. And I'm getting some questions coming in. Were the Nephilims black? Did they come through the seed or the lineage of Ham? What say you, Gary, on that, regarding that question?
Well, we don't get anything biblically as to skin color coming from the Nephilim in the Bible. One presumes, though, that these ones were white. Other descriptions would have them as very pale white skin, just as the Aryans and of red hair and blonde hair would be pale white skin and quite hairy. But that's just, sort of one version. And as I said, there's many different versions, and there would have been people all over the world, and there's different accounts from all over the world. So when you get into some of these sculptures and understanding out of Central America, you actually get this understanding that there was 4 different colors of giants. And this also shows up in, the Lost Book of Og, which is part of the Manichaean Book of Giants that was just released by the Vatican and translated. I think probably was based on the Aramaic Book of Giants out of the Qumran edition, because it's got some more details in it. But I guess where I'm going with this is it shows them of all different color in that sort of legend and or occult type of polytheist memory of giants coming forward. So I think there probably were giants of different color. It just makes sense, right?
It makes sense. And you brought up that word, the Vatican. What is the Vatican's connection to this Illuminati bloodline? It seems like, the United Nations, and forgive me if I'm going all over the map here, but the United Nations is actually the military arm of the Vatican. Where does the Vatican, Brother Gary, play into this Illuminati bloodline system?
Well, typically you have, as the Pope, you have, for the most part, over the millennia, Italian popes. There's the odd French one. And so you also have, bloodlines, that come out of the Roman Empire. And all of the senators before Julius Caesar seized control of the empire, and of course he's part of that same royal bloodlines, they took their bloodlines back to the gods as well as the ruling class. I mean, you weren't going to become a senator or a noble unless you had those royal bloodlines. And as you move that forward, you're not going to be a leader of the church unless you come out of those noble families and are going to be educated. So one presumes there was a lot of bloodline that were in and out of the Pope on a regular basis. And today you have a Jesuit on the Vatican throne today. So for the first time, you have a Jesuit who is a black pope and the white pope, combining that together. And you also have Pope Francis taking control over the Knights of St. John, that also uses a double cross in their iconology in a number of areas, and has been one of the more influential secret societies in European politics over the last many hundreds of years, right? And are typically made up of offspring of the royal bloodline. So, and what Francis did last February is he got rid of the Grand Master of the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Malta, and took direct control over it. So now he has consolidated all of that, and he also just got rid of the conservative policy and doctrine advisor that was out of the Benedict popeship, and so now you've got Jesuit who were replaced in there controlling the doctrine. So you've got this Jesuit control of essentially everything in the Catholic Church today, and the Jesuits, which I didn't mention earlier on, when they were formed, they interpret the Bible through the 7 sacred sciences and philosophy. And so this is polytheism. And so now you have this interpretation that's going to go on Bible doctrine, controlled by a Jesuit, the first time in history. And there was a pope in the 1200s, not a pope, a bishop, a priest in the 1200s from Ireland, as I recall, named Malachi, who listed off all of the popes that would come and gave some distinguishing characteristics of the Pope so that you would know. And he's been bang on all the way through. And the last Pope, which we're on today, according to his predictions, was identified as the anti-Pope and the Black Pope. And as I just mentioned, the leader of the Jesuits are a Black Pope, and Francis was the leader. He's now on the throne. And I think for only really maybe the second time and I might be corrected on that, I think it was Pope Gregory in about 1600 that was replaced. You have a replacement Pope while another one is still alive. And anti-Pope, if you take that as Antichrist and take that back to Greek out of the New Testament, it can also mean, not only can it mean like the opposite or opposing of Christ, it can also mean a replacement Christ. And in this case, you have a replacement Pope in place. So one wonders whether or not we're getting closer to the end time with the last Pope that's starting to make a way for the universal religion. And he's very, very political.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and concerning this particular Pope being political, I'm glad that you brought that up. I remember last year, excuse me, during the campaign, the presidential campaign, it was this Pope who had said, kind of rebuked our present-day president, Donald Trump, saying that, he was, in other words, this what the Pope was telling Trump, not to be political. Well, that's none of the Pope's business to be getting in Donald Trump's business to talk about politics. And so I'm glad that you brought that up because, and it gets to my next question. We go from the Vatican. This term, Europe, again, not to get away from exposing the Illuminati bloodlines here in the 21st century. I had heard from an Egyptologist years ago, Gary, and just correct me if I'm wrong because I'm your student tonight. I'm learning that this term Europe, capital EU, then ROPE, actually was a name of a woman of color, Europa, capital EUROPA. Europa was a woman of color, so that the continent of East and Western Europe is actually named after a black woman. I don't know how true that is, but I can tell you this term Europe, it could mean to be roped off as well. You roped, or the roped off from civilization. What's your take on the word, or the etymology of the word Europe?
Well, my understanding as well is it also goes back to as I recall, a Greek god called Europa.
Yep, I agree. Yeah,
So
I agree.
You could look at it either way. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Get to a couple more questions here concerning Africa again. And this message is from James. He is from Fort Worth, Texas. He's a pastor. His question for you, Gary, is where will there ever be a time that the world will be freed of the Illuminati? Will there ever be a time where this world will be free from the Illuminati? Very good question.
Will there ever be a time where we're free from the Illuminati?
Yes,
I think yes. That's absolutely we will be, but it will take the end time to free us of it.
Wow. My personal question, getting to the Lee dynasty. I know we got 10 minutes left, but the Lee dynasty, where does this dynastic kingdom come into play today on the world stage when it comes to exerting its muscle as an Illuminati bloodline? Very interesting.
Run that question by me again.
The Lee family of China, of Asia, how are they connected to the original bloodlines of the past, and how does this family, the Lee dynasty, how are they exerting themselves on the world stage? Do you see them on this global chessboard, as Albert Pike talked about?
Well, and we have a Lee in charge of China today, Li Peng, and he goes back to the Lee dynasty, and the Lee dynasty, all of the dynasties descending out of the three sovereigns, and then the five empires, and then the Yellow Emperor, which was the Shah people or the Lee people. All of the dynasties that came thereafter were Lees from the Shah people. And so when the communists took over, they obviously Mao replaced the Lee control of power. But even at that time, there was Lees involved in the communist revolution, and Lees have been in power in terms of working within the government. And now they have a Lee ruling, and he's moving to be ruler for life, as we speak. And so this is not a coincidence again. And the Lee family has been, members of the secret societies in China, and are oversee sponsors of secret societies. And the Lee family is some of the more powerful families in Southeast Asia. And they all go back to the Shah dynasty. And just as the Yamamoto dynasty in Japan, it also links back to the same gods, and early on into these dynasties of China that start later on from the dynasties that start the Yamamoto dynasty in somewhere around 600 or 700 BC. So the Lee family is the royal bloodline from the dragon gods of China.
This is good. And next time you come on, when you come back on the broadcast, I really want to get deeper into this Li dynasty that rumor has it, I know in the Oriental community here in New York City, that the Bruce Lee, the legend of the 1970s martial arts industry,
Enter the Dragon,
was taken out. Yeah, there you go. Yes, was actually taken out by the Li dynasty. I don't know how true that is, but there's a lot of rumors in the Chinese community that says so.
Yeah. Well, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds have had a very close relationship with the Lees, and even today, Li Peng, every time he comes to North America, is meeting with the Rockefellers. This is a long-established understanding of the ruling class around the world and those partnerships that I alluded to a little earlier. And there's secret societies that have been in China for a very long period of time, just as they have been in the West, because they all have that antediluvian history. Just as Freemasonry, the ancient Masonic organization, was created in the time of Enoch and Lamech, of the progeny of Cain. And so you've got, I'll just give a few names here, but you've got like the Red Spears Secret Society in China, and and the Lees were a member of that. And you have another Lee that was a communist leader that held membership in the Green Gang Secret Society that worked with Mao to put him in power. So you have, in Hong Kong, you have, Li Ka-shing, who is, head of the Chinese Illuminati of Hong Kong. And the Lees control, all of the triads around the world. So anytime you have an organization with a triad, that's generally on a 99% rule controlled by a member of the Li dynasty. Another. I'm just trying to think of another name. Here's one that you should be aware of. It's called the Wutsu Society, and Wu means from five, or the five empires, and Su meaning ancestor, or so the ancestors of the five empires. And it's the Eastern movement that is the equivalent that Freemasonry recognizes them as the Eastern movement of Freemasonry, or vice versa. It's just that they have a bit of a competition as who they think is older, but they all go back to the Masonic organization of the seven sacred sciences before the flood. And the triads are just a secret society like the Masons, right? They are an initiatory society, and they're a hybrid organization of royal bloodlines that just are using that as a way of power and control, right? And another, and it's variously known, the triad, as the Heaven and Earth Society, right? And that is, as in heaven, as below, right? That is right out of Hermetic doctrine and Gnosticism. Like the understanding couldn't be, more distinct. And you've got also over there, you have the White Lotus Society and the Hung Society, which ultimately form the Triad Society that's also known as the Three United Society. So all of this has an ancient sort of history. And so when you look at that model in the West, the mafia is also controlled by the bloodlines and the secret societies.
There you go. I was getting ready to bring that up, especially the Japanese mafia. And I might be mispronouncing the name of this Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, capital Y-A-K-U-Z-A, which originates, according to Japanese mythology and demonology, back to some of the watchers in Genesis chapter 6. That term, Yakuza, was also the name of a watcher. Very interesting.
Via the warrior class and ruling class of the Tengu that I mentioned earlier.
Man, this is so powerful. And next time too, we can touch on the ethnicity, the genealogy of Genghis Khan in the Mongolian Empire that could be, traced back to its origins, to its history, to Genesis chapter 6. Brother Gary, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Well, thank you for having me, and hopefully, I was able to connect some dots and make some sense for the listeners and get them thinking in some areas that maybe they hadn't thought about all that closely before.
Yeah, please come back. Please come back, and we love you. We love your ministry, and God has ordained you to transform the world. Thank you so much for being with us. God bless you. God bless you. And to all of our global spiritual, God bless you. You got it. To all of our global spiritual partners, we will definitely see you next time here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, where we are raising the consciousness of mankind to become the consciousness of the Lord Jesus Christ. We will be with you on next week here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Forgive me for coughing so much during the broadcast. I've been battling the flu for the past month, maybe a month and a half. Amen. We thank God for Gary Wayne coming on tonight, exposing Illuminati bloodlines in the 21st century here with our very special guest, Mr. Gary Wayne. He will be back with us very soon here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. On next week, amen, we're going to have some powerful special guests, and I'm not going to tell you who they are. I'm going to keep you in proper suspense. God bless you, and we will see you next time here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Have a great night.